It should give us pause that we, in Eastern Canada, are overly reliant on oil that either has to come by way of the United States or has to be shipped in from overseas.
Are you talking about a clear plan to move ahead with the replacement for that?
Alberta just threw down the gauntlet with a pipeline proposal so audacious it's making Ottawa sweat bullets.
Oh, well, we definitely need to have the tunnel built for Line 5. I think what we're talking about is a backup plan.
Premier Danielle Smith isn't just talking infrastructure. She's weaponizing Indigenous reconciliation against the very government that claims to champion it. The question isn't whether this pipeline will get built. It's whether Canada's political establishment will survive the earthquake Smith just triggered.
It would be a separate pipeline. We'd have to find another route so that we have the ability to bring more oil to Eastern Canada.
Let me break down exactly what's happening here, because the mainstream media is doing their usual dance around the real story. I think Smith isn't just proposing another pipeline. She's essentially telling British Columbia to get on board or get left behind while simultaneously weaponizing Indigenous reconciliation as her trump card. Want to know what's really happening?
When I talk to the pipeline companies, they say every single one of them, the very best option for Canada to expand its markets, have a substantial new pipeline, is a pipeline to the Northwest BC coast.
The Alberta Premier has been floating this Northwest BC coast pipeline idea for months, but now she's tied it directly to the Pathways Alliance carbon capture project, creating what she calls the perfect marriage of energy security and environmental responsibility.
For the pipeline project that Premier Smith is a great enthusiast of, a heavy oil pipeline project, there is no project, there is no proponent, there is no private sector money involved at all that I'm aware of. When Premier Smith crosses those obvious hurdles to get a project done, then let's have those conversations.
Here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean politically explosive. David Eby, BC's premier, basically told Smith to take her pipeline dreams and shove them where the Alberta oil sands don't shine. His response was classic political dismissal. Well, he clearly said that without proponents, there will be no project. But here's what Eby doesn't understand. Smith isn't backing down, and she's got a strategy that's more sophisticated than BC's premier seems to realize.
We have a different way of engaging with Indigenous partners through our Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, where we underwrite loan guarantees for them to purchase into an equity stake.
The genius, or depending on your perspective, the manipulation, lies in how Smith is framing this entire debate around Indigenous partnership and economic reconciliation. Think about this for a second. She's not just pushing for another controversial pipeline, she's positioning Alberta as the champion of Indigenous economic empowerment while making the federal government look like the obstacle to progress. I think this is brilliant political theater, and here's why. Through Alberta's Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, Smith has already proven she can deliver real equity stakes to Indigenous communities, not just empty consultation promises.
The first time that it went through, it had 35 Indigenous partners who were equity owners in that, and that has to be the starting point for any new project.
Meanwhile, Bill C-5 sits in the background like a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. This federal legislation is supposedly designed to fast-track national infrastructure projects while ensuring proper Indigenous consultation. But I believe Smith knows something that many people don't. The bill could either be her greatest ally or her worst nightmare, depending on how the federal government chooses to interpret its own rules. Are you starting to see the trap she's setting?
Alberta, as the owner of the resource, we can be one of the guaranteed shippers on that line.
Think about the political chess game happening here. Smith is essentially daring the federal government to reject a project that would create thousands of Indigenous jobs, provide genuine economic partnership opportunities, and reduce Canada's dependence on American energy infrastructure. If Ottawa says no, they look like hypocrites who talk about reconciliation but refuse to deliver economic opportunities. If they say yes, they're endorsing a massive fossil fuel project that their environmental base absolutely despises. Checkmate, anyone?
I would say that the entire country has changed their approach on major projects of national interest.
But here's what really makes this fascinating. And I think this is where Smith shows her political genius. She isn't just fighting BC and Ottawa, she's fighting time itself. The August 1st deadline for Canada-US trade negotiations looms large, and every day that passes without energy infrastructure, certainty makes Canada look weaker at the bargaining table. Smith knows that energy security has become a national security issue, especially with Trump back in the White House making threats about tariffs and trade wars. Coincidence? I think not.
When we did some polling to find out how people felt about pipelines, we saw over 70% support in most provinces, including a majority support in Quebec. And so I would say that people understand the threat of having a single customer, that we need to trade more with each other.
The Indigenous angle is where this gets really complex, because I believe Smith is essentially forcing everyone to choose sides in a way that exposes the contradictions in Canadian politics. For decades, governments have promised Indigenous communities economic partnership while simultaneously blocking the very projects that could deliver that partnership. Smith is calling that bluff in the most public way possible. But will it work?
That we would be able to have a Northwest BC Coast pipeline with the Pathways project.
EB's dismissive response reveals something crucial about the political dynamics at play. BC has gotten comfortable being the gatekeeper for Alberta's energy ambitions. But I think Smith is changing the rules of the game in ways EB hasn't anticipated. By tying the pipeline to Indigenous economic empowerment and carbon reduction technology, she's making it much harder for BC to play the environmental card without looking like they're blocking Indigenous prosperity. How's that for political jiu-jitsu?
I'm asking for those 9 bad laws to be either substantially modified or repealed.
The federal government finds itself in an impossible position. And honestly, I think they walked right into Smith's trap. Bill C-5 was supposed to streamline infrastructure approval while ensuring Indigenous voices were heard. But Smith is testing whether that legislation actually means anything, or if it's just another bureaucratic smokescreen. If the federal government fast-tracks this pipeline under C-5, they validate Smith's approach and potentially open the floodgates for similar projects. If they don't, they prove that their reconciliation rhetoric is all talk. Which path do you think they'll choose? CTA, here's the thing. While mainstream media misses these chess moves entirely, we're breaking down exactly how these political games reshape Canada's future. So smashing that subscribe button means you won't miss the next bombshell when it drops.
I've been so happy with how constructive Premier Canoe has been in talking about wanting to build out this port-to-port-to-port economic corridor as well.
What makes Smith's strategy particularly clever, and I have to admire the political craftsmanship here, is how she's using the Pathways Alliance carbon capture project as political cover. She can argue that this isn't just another dirty oil pipeline, it's a lower carbon energy corridor that represents the future of responsible resource development. That messaging is designed to split the environmental movement and make it harder for opponents to paint this as just another fossil fuel grab. Genius or manipulation? You decide.
What I like about Port of Prince Rupert is that they have an expansion plan to try to be, I think, the second biggest port in Canada. It really gives you a clear run to wide open deep sea with an 8-day delivery to Korea and to Japan.
The Port of Prince Rupert becomes crucial in this equation because it represents something that Vancouver doesn't: unlimited expansion potential with direct access to Asian markets. I think Smith isn't just talking about energy export. She's talking about positioning Canada as Asia's preferred energy supplier, while BC's overcrowded southern ports struggle with capacity constraints. But wait, isn't this exactly what would make BC irrelevant in the energy game? Indigenous leaders find themselves at the center of this storm, and their decisions will likely determine the outcome. Here's what I find fascinating. Smith is offering real equity stakes and genuine partnership, not just consultation and promises. That's a fundamentally different approach than what most Indigenous communities have experienced with previous pipeline proposals. The question becomes whether Indigenous leaders trust Smith's government to deliver on these commitments, or whether they see this as another attempt to use their communities as political pawns. What would you do in their position?
The likelihood of an early agreement, talking about a renegotiated Canada-US free trade agreement by next year, which was the timeline. And that's a bit disappointing, I think.
The timing couldn't be more critical, and I believe this is all carefully orchestrated. With global energy markets in flux and Canada's relationship with the United States under constant renegotiation, energy infrastructure decisions made today will shape the country's economic future for decades. Smith understands that whoever controls the narrative around Indigenous partnership and energy security wins this debate. But is she playing with fire?
Because I think that that's the marriage that we're looking at. If we can have a lower carbon product going through that pipeline, I think that that helps to get the social acceptability. So
Eby's position becomes increasingly untenable as this plays out, and I think he knows it. He can't simultaneously champion Indigenous rights and economic reconciliation while blocking projects that deliver both. BC has built its political identity around environmental protection, but Smith is forcing them to confront the contradiction between environmental activism and Indigenous economic empowerment. Talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place.
Both her and Eby said that they agree with more than they disagree. And so
the federal government's response to this proposal will reveal everything about their actual priorities. And honestly, I think we already know what that response will be. If they prioritize environmental concerns over Indigenous economic opportunity, they expose the hollow nature of their reconciliation promises. If they support the pipeline, they alienate their environmental base, but potentially deliver genuine economic partnership with Indigenous communities. Either way, someone's getting thrown under the bus.
When she was talking about a proponent coming forward within a matter of weeks, we haven't seen that. And now she's talking about other priorities, which I think a lot of Albertans would be surprised to hear.
What we're witnessing isn't just another pipeline debate. It's a fundamental reshaping of how Canada approaches major infrastructure decisions in the context of Indigenous partnership and economic reconciliation. I believe Smith has managed to create a scenario where everyone's political contradictions are exposed, and the choices made here will reverberate through Canadian politics for years to come. Are we watching the birth of a new political paradigm?
I think it's connected to political realities. I think it's them becoming alive to the fact that Albertans are expecting sound governance.
The real bombshell isn't the pipeline itself. It's how Smith has managed to turn Indigenous economic empowerment into a weapon against the very governments that claim to champion reconciliation while blocking the projects that could deliver it. Checkmate or catastrophe? Only time will tell. Subscribe for more analysis on the political earthquakes reshaping Canada's energy future.